The 22-year-old, who's called Laura Trowbridge, injured her back and pelvis when she fell down the cave, which is called Otter Hole by the River Wye north of Chepstow. She was eventually pulled free just after 4 o'clock. Bob Constantine has spent the day at the scene, which is not far from Chepstow. Let's talk to him now. Bob.
Well, Jenny, you join me on the banks of a rather wet River Wye, I'm afraid, about a mile upstream from the scene of this unfolding drama that's kept us riveted, really, throughout the whole day. It's been a day of hopes raised, hopes dashed, of fears and expectations. 1 minute we learnt that Laura was about 100 metres from the entrance and will be out shortly, then 20 metres from the entrance, but there she was stuck for an agonising hour and a half while they transferred her from a stretcher so they could get around a bend in the cave. It's been that sort of a day, but then finally, about an hour and a half ago, we heard the news we'd all been waiting for, and that her ordeal was over.
3, 2, 1, go! Here she is.
For almost an entire day, they'd been struggling in the dark, damp confines of the cave. Then, at 4:30 this afternoon, they finally brought her out. Gently, slowly, Laura was carried into the daylight, and she finally knew that she was safe. Her injuries and the tide which floods part of the cave meant rescuers had had one of their trickiest operations to bring her to the surface.
Yeah, no, just loading into the structure for Sarah to do their bit.
Hundreds of feet above, the news was radioed to the exhausted volunteers.
Well, I think it's an excellent result, and I think the work that's been done by everybody is absolutely superb. I mean, the amount of effort that's gone in by the teams through the last 24 hours has been absolutely superb, and it comes brilliant.
The woman was then carefully lifted onto a rescue boat moored on the River Wye so that she could be taken to an air ambulance waiting further downstream. The drama had begun 19 hours earlier when the woman slipped and injured her back deep inside Otter Hole near Chepstow. A caver herself, she was with a film crew making a programme about the cave for HTV. Otter Hole's entrance lies just above the River Wye. The accident happened around 700 metres along a tunnel. Between there and the exit, the cave dips down in a U-bend, which is flooded with water at high tide, trapping anyone on the other side. It was only after the tide went down this morning that the rescue proper could begin.
It's a very tight cave, and so it's very awkward and very slow to manoeuvre. No more than that, really.
For everyone, this was an exhausting experience, but one with a mercifully happy ending. Well, the rain is still coming down, but everybody, I can tell you here, is delighted at the way things have turned out. I'm joined by Paul Taylor from Gloucestershire Cave Rescue Group, who helped coordinate all this. Congratulations, your emotions now.
Very, very pleased to see a long day now almost completed. She's out the cave, on her way to hospital. We've got gear and stuff to go and sort out and pack away and wash and all sorts of stuff, but very, very happy and very pleased for everybody. The work they put in underground was a super effort. I mean,
and just how tricky was it?
The last little bit, I knew yesterday was going to be the bit that was going to be a bit of a stumbling block. I've been there myself in a stretcher, but only as a casualty, you know, not an injured casualty, and I knew that was going to be an awkward bit there.
And all this is carried out by volunteers, people like yourself. You're a businessman in real life, as it were. You've had to give up all your time to do this.
That's correct, yeah. I mean, there's 100 people been here over, you know, basically the last 2 days, from last night and through today, and nobody's getting paid. We just do this for fun.
Okay, well, it didn't seem like fun today, did it? But there we are. It's all come to a successful conclusion, and Laura Trowbridge should by now be in hospital.
Bob Constantine there. Thanks very much indeed.
Captain badly injured in an underground cave for more than 24 hours has finally been rescued. Laura Trowbridge fell 7 feet while exploring Otter Hole Cave by the River Wye in Chepstow last night. More than 100 people worked through the night to get her out. Wirra Davis is there. It was a pretty difficult operation, wasn't it, Wirra?
Indeed, Sophie, a very dramatic day here in the Wye Valley. As you said, in the last hour, Laura was brought out from those woods behind me after spending the best part of a day trapped in the dank, dark conditions of a cave system. But she was only rescued thanks to the work of at least 5 emergency services. 24 hours after she was injured and trapped inside a complex system of caves, freedom, thanks to a massive rescue operation involving more than 60 people. But so badly was she hurt that she couldn't be brought out back up the slope to the road. Her rescuers had to gently lower her into a motorboat and taken out via the River Wye. Some of those rescuers had worked throughout the night. Muddied and exhausted, they emerged from Otter Hole, one of the best-known cave networks in the country.
Lots of tight areas in amongst bigger areas, which makes carrying a lot easier. But it is difficult to get round the smaller areas with the casualty being so tender. It's obviously quite a serious injury she's got.
Just to confirm, the stretcher is just clearing the entrance side of the sump.
Several experienced teams coordinated the rescue after the 22-year-old, who'd been exploring the caves with other potholers, fell several feet and was badly hurt. This has been a very complex rescue operation. The cave entrance is just across the River Wye there, but as the river level rises, it floods the cave. There's a U-bend, a sump in the system, which blocks the exit. The woman was the other side of that sump. It was a long, delicate operation through the tight, narrow gaps that cavers usually love. But tonight, after her long ordeal, the 22-year-old is recovering, having tested the training and experience of virtually every emergency service going. So a pretty elaborate and expensive way of pulling out one person. Perhaps that is the nature of caving. But tonight everybody here is basically patting themselves on the back, saying it's been a job well done. Sophie.
Well, thank you very much.
First tonight, that dramatic rescue that everyone's been talking about. A woman from Somerset has been freed after being trapped underground for nearly 24 hours.
She's a member of a Bristol potholing club, and it's been a massive effort to rescue her from a cave near the River Wye at Chepstow after she was injured last night. Around 100 volunteers mucked in, and our reporter Graham Gardner is there. Good evening, Graham. They must be absolutely delighted.
Well, good evening, Susan. You know, you have to admire the professionalism and patience of the cave rescue volunteers who take part in these operations. For most of us unused to this sort of waiting, it's been a day of watching second-hand spinning around watches, watching minutes turn into hours as each deadline has come and passed. But the moment everyone here has been working for came late this afternoon. Not quite the end of her ordeal, but at least she could breathe fresh air again. On the stretcher, the 22-year-old woman member of the Bristol-based Wessex Cave Club had been strapped to for nearly 24 hours. They lifted her gingerly into one of the two waiting Severn-area rescue boats. From there, the relatively short hop across the River Wye to a field where the next stage of her journey began. So hostile is the terrain around here, an air ambulance was the only way to get her to hospital. In fact, you could hardly choose a more difficult place to get to. Buried deep beneath Chepstow Racecourse, where the river cuts a swathe through the Forest of Dean and Wye Valley. Around 100 volunteers, mainly from the Gloucestershire and West Brecon Cave Rescue teams, got the call around 5:30 yesterday evening. It was the start of a painstaking operation, carried out in some of the most inhospitable conditions imaginable.
The cave is absolutely muddy, but also it's very, very constricted in places and contorted, so you're trying to get around corners and sort of how you get a person in a stretcher who's held rigid and straight, whereas normally you have to bend your body to get around them. It's it's quite difficult.
Otter Hole is around 400 to 500 feet underground and about 2.5 miles long. Potholers come here because it has some of the most spectacular formations of stalagmites and stalactites. But it's also one of the most inaccessible.
That has been a logistical nightmare for us, in as much as that we need to be able to ensure that that we've got the casualty past that point where there's going to be no requirement for the sump closing, because that means that we can't get personnel in or out of the cave.
It's thought the group were shooting their own video film about rock formations. They did not expect to have such a central role in their own drama. Well, I can now confirm that the woman at the centre of this rescue throughout the day is Laura Trowbridge, a 22-year-old student who lives in Taunton. Come back to us later when we'll be speaking to someone who was directly involved in that rescue operation. But from now, from Chepstow, it's back to you in the studio.
Thanks, Graham. What an extraordinary rescue. Well, let's have some more details on that remarkable rescue. Chris.
Well, why was it so difficult to get the potholer out? Let's take a look at what the rescuers were up against. This is Otter's Hole. 2 miles of underground twists and turns, and one of the most difficult caves in the UK. It's notorious among potholers, and this is why. Because of the nearby tidal River Wye, the cave can fill up very quickly with water. A couple of hours either side of low tide is your only chance to get in and out. Once you're in, you have to stay in. So the rescuers had to work extremely quickly to get past this sump, as it's called, before they were trapped for another night. Well, in the worst case scenario, they would have had to carry her through the sump. This is what it might have been like. Pitch black, apart from the lights they carry with them, very cold and very muddy. You can see how difficult it would be to carry a stretcher through this kind of terrain, and think of all the other equipment that they've got to take in with them. Well, in the event, they didn't have to deal with that kind of nightmare, but it was still very awkward, like these pictures taken under the Mendip hills. It took more than 30 people working in small teams. They managed to form a sort of human chain, passing the potholer over their heads to safety. But it was the last few feet of the cave that proved the most difficult for the rescuers. It would have been just like this, crawling conditions only. It took them several hours to negotiate the ups and downs, and they actually had to take the potholer off the stretcher for this bit. Well, thankfully, accidents like this don't happen that often. In fact, until yesterday, no one had ever been injured in Otter's Hole. But it's always thanks to the skills of brave volunteers that potholers get out safe and alive. Susan.
Thanks, Chris. Well, other news tonight.
Caver from Somerset who'd been trapped underground for 24 hours. Well, Graham Gardner joins us again from near the River Wye.
Yes, here the weather is certainly closing in and the rescue operation is just about wound down. But one of the men who was here at 4 o'clock this morning and is still here is Paul Taylor, who is the chairman of the Gloucestershire Cave Rescue Group. Paul, remarkable resilience shown by your members.
Oh, very much so. I mean, it's been a wonderful team effort, a superhuman effort put in underground to get her out this evening. We had a number of sort of cruxes that we had to meet during this, which was last night to get people back into the cave before the tidal sump closed, and again 12 o'clock midday we needed her to be, you know, the entrance side of that tidal sump.
And to achieve the result that you did after all of that?
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and excellent to see her going off down on the boat and away off to hospital. Was really good end to the day. Great that we didn't have this appalling weather all day long. It wouldn't have been as good.
Paul, I have to ask you very briefly, were they at fault at all? Were they to blame?
Not at all. I mean, it was just a genuine accident. I mean, could happen to anybody really. They were in the cave making the film, and she just slipped, and that could have been it.
Paul Taylor, thank you very much indeed for hanging on to talk to us in these appalling weather conditions as they are now. But from a very wet Chepstow, it's back to you in the studio.
Graham, thanks very much indeed.
Well, one other head.